And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of the Top Podcast. I'm your host, Harris Reno, alongside me, co-host Dan Kiley, episode 126 of the Top Podcast. I almost messed up when we went live. I almost didn't go live. I started the countdown, and I realized I didn't hit the live button. And then I stopped it, and I saw Dan look up, like, what's he doing? But yeah, so I almost messed it up. I'm glad we're live. I've done that once before. Me and Dan have done that whole intro before your boy realized we weren't live. So I'm glad I didn't repeat that mistake this evening. It's been a while since I made that mistake. Although I'm sure I will be mid-conversation with Dan, and Dan will say, hey, you're muted. So that's like a once a show, any given show type of deal. Dan, how are you doing this wonderful Monday evening?
Hey, listen, the day didn't start great, but I've rallied, and I'm here. It's Alabama week. I couldn't miss this show, so I am here. I've rallied. Let's go.
Hey, let's get it. I have had quite a few energy drinks today. Had two within the first 4 hours of me being awake, and then I had one maybe an hour before the show. So I am juiced to the gills, you may say. I'm just glad I've made it to the show after those energy drinks. So I'm really excited. Bama Week's always a fun week for us. I feel like Bama not only brings out the best, maybe you could say, of Georgia on the field, but it brings out the best of this show. Our pre-Bama episodes are some of the best that we've done. And maybe it's just because for the other 15 games, usually we don't have a big game to preview to. But hey, Bama's the game that we can always count on. Georgia's going to have a big game. It's going to be a good game. And then before we get into that, we have a loaded preview for that, by the way. It should be, as long as it's executed perfectly, should be one of our best previews. But before that, we have hot topics. Dan, I like these this week. Really do. Not many weeks that I don't like them, but these are hard-hitting this week. And I don't know my answer for the first one, which is why you're going first, which has become usual. Which college football team has impressed you the most this season? As you discussed on the phone, Georgia's off the table.
Georgia's off the table. I would say Ole Miss because I just like Ole Miss. I don't know what it is about them. I think it's a Lane Kiffin thing. I'm just a big fan of Lane Kiffin, but I'm not going to go there because they have played absolutely no one, and there's no way to gauge what they're really doing. The team I'm going to go with wears a color that I will never wear, but they are cousins of ours, so to speak. They are the University of Tennessee. And before you freak out, I'm not hitching my wagons to Tennessee. But damn it if they haven't really impressed me. They have really transformed that defense. Their offense we kind of knew was going to be pretty good. We didn't know with Nico Iamaleava at quarterback what they were going to be able to accomplish. We had heard so much about the young man, and he has delivered. He really has. He has delivered about as well as you could hope a young quarterback could. Josh Heupel has done a great job of reloading the offense. They are extremely talented, but I think the more important thing is that their defense is really holding up, and they are not letting them down. Say what you will about Oklahoma. Obviously, they're not the powerhouse that they once were, but Oklahoma's a really good football team. And I blocked a bunch of people on Twitter because I had made a Tennessee fan was asking just a basic question. It wasn't meant to insult anybody, but they asked, how do you think Tennessee will fare in their first 6 games of the season? And I was looking at the schedule and I said, I think they can navigate that. I do. And then I was attacked with Georgia fan checks out, doesn't know football, doesn't know ball. Oklahoma's going to kick the shit out of them, all this other stuff. And I blocked all those people. I wish I hadn't because I would have loved to throw that back in their face last week. I am petty like that. But I didn't get the opportunity. But the team that has really impressed me this early in the football season is Tennessee. They have played a good game, and they just look really, really good, really well-rounded. I know that game on Georgia schedules is always scheduled or circled, but it's going to be a big one.
Man, that was going to be my bailout right there. I was going to use them. Not even going to lie to you. Well, it's all good. I agree with all the points you gave, but I ain't going to use this as a cop-out not to give an answer. Dan.
If you want to give Tennessee, give your spin.
No, because there's not really much spin to it. You executed that perfectly. I'm honestly, there's not many other teams that I could say I haven't seen what they've done
What about
coming.
Miami? Miami was close second for me because Miami's looked really good.
Miami
What's
looked good. But it's hard with Miami because when I look at their slate, I can't really judge how good they are because I don't know how good the ACC is. I mean, obviously they beat Florida. They destroyed Florida, and I ain't gonna take away from that. That's a rivalry game. We know how different rivalry games can be. But I think if you ask me this in like 2 or 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks actually, yeah, make it 4 weeks, I would say Miami because you look at the slate. They got to play Virginia Tech. They got to play California. They got their home versus Virginia Tech. Their home versus California. Go on the road to Louisville, which right now that's probably their biggest game of the season because they don't play Clemson. Yes, they have Florida State at home. Yeah, I am really curious to see how Miami fares down the year. I just don't know with the ACC. But I guess my answer, Dan, I have multiple because if it was last week, I would say USC because USC looked improved on defense. They beat LSU. But then this week can't happen. I'm like, nah, they got shit on by Michigan. Excuse my language. So it's not USC. I guess Clemson impressed me this since the Georgia loss. Clemson's rebounded, has played well. Then again, same answer. Don't really know about the competition. So I guess I'll go for the cop-out answer and go ahead and put on the closet hat that Dan likes to say. I guess we'll go with Texas. Texas has looked and rebounded pretty well considering what they lost last year. Wasn't quite sure about what their offense will look like out of the gate without Xavier Worthy and A.D. Mitchell. We know how special A.D. Mitchell is. We know how special Xavier Worthy was. But not even just that. Their defensive front has looked pretty good considering they lost 2 NFL draft picks, 1 first-round draft pick in Byron Murphy. Their secondary has looked improved. But Dan, with Texas, I guess there's another caveat here, which is what makes your answer at Tennessee, I think, probably the best answer out of the bunch. I don't know how to judge Texas' game over Michigan. I will give Texas credit. They have dominated every single opponent they've played, which is what you want to see. Texas has not shown the, quote, vulnerabilities that other teams have shown. Got to give them credit. But is Michigan this staple win, this win that you can stamp and say, that's a playoff that's a national contender? They're the favorite to win the national title. I don't know. We will see. There is that staple game on there. That stamp of authority game on their schedule. Just so happens Georgia looks to be that game. So I guess, Dan, to give you 4 answers for a question that you really want one answer at, that's my answer. Question number 2. I think this might be a case where we both have the same answer because there's really only one answer.
Yes.
What teams disappointed you the most?
Well, there have been some teams that have been disappointing at times. I believe Notre Dame missed an opportunity by losing the football game they should have never lost. And they had a schedule that they could have walked through. LSU played horrible football in one football game. And I shouldn't say horrible football. The end of the game was horrific. But there's only one answer. It's not UNC losing to James Madison, even though that's abysmal. But it's FSU. I mean, the team is supposed to be a powerhouse team. And you start the season 0-3 against Georgia Tech. You're going to have to help me. Georgia Tech, somebody else is not good.
Boston College.
Which
has been decent this year.
And then who's the third one? Memphis.
That's it.
And then your coach, and you'll have to tell me if I read the wrong thing, but he said if your team opened up with the 3 quality, he said something about when you open up with 3 quality teams, like, come on, dude. Like, those are 3 dubs. Like, if you're Florida State, those are 3 wins. You're going to tell the entire country that you were the best team in the country. I don't want to go off on a tangent here. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but FSU is supposed to be a national power. And you didn't put any effort into recruiting. You went through the transfer portal and you got the wrong quarterback. The end. There's no argument. You could have had Cam Ward, and he's doing great in Miami. There were plenty of other guys out there, but you picked DJU. And you suck. You got DJU, and you suck. You're horrible. And you won a game this weekend, and you're probably going to win again this weekend because you play whoever the hell you play this week. But I mean, am I wrong, Harrison? It's FSU. It's got to be FSU. Like you can't be this bad when you're FSU.
No, I mean it's atrocious what happened there. 0-3. And I think we already had the rant. We had it, was it last week or the week before, where we talked about how FSU is the living example of why you don't build your team through the portal. Yes, you can supplement your roster through the portal. Yes, you can use the portal. Don't be like Dabo Swinney. You don't need to be. But just saying, screw it. I'm going to go get the top 8 portal players or try and go get the best portal players at every single position and field a team with that. That's the problem. FSU has no depth. If you miss on the portal, guys, look at their roster. They don't have an answer. The reason DJU is still their starting quarterback is because their backup quarterback, at least judging by the results or judging why he's not in, is he's not better than DJU, which is a problem because DJU, how many SEC teams would DJU start at quarterback for?
Maybe Texas A&M.
Not many. I don't know. I think Texas A&M's backup's probably better than DJU, judging by how he played versus Florida.
The problem with a guy like DJU is when you see him, he's impressive. And you think this is the problem with coaches also, is every single coach thinks that they're the coach that can fix them. Sometimes you just have to cut bait.
Bingo. Yeah. I haven't given an answer. I just now realized now we're talking about it. I'm gonna go with you here because it's recent, fresh in my mind. Brett Venables had one job, and it was to hit on this damn quarterback. You let a really good, we'll go good to really good quarterback and Dylan Gabriel bounce. You told him to kick rocks. You can go to Oregon. We got this former 5-star stud on our roster who's going to replace you. We'd rather lose you than him, which is crazy considering Dylan Gabriel won you the Red River rivalry game last year in a matchup with Texas you shouldn't have won at all. Texas was the better team by far. Texas should have won that game, but Dylan Gabriel was the best player in the field that day. Go watch the game. He was. You let that guy bounce. You let him go to Eugene. And I know Eugene hasn't had a great start in terms of being dominant, in terms of being a playoff contender, but what OU has now done since is Jackson Arnold has been, what's the most respectful way to say this? Hasn't played up to expectation. Just hasn't. He was not playing winning football on Saturday, and that's the biggest difference between Tennessee and OU right now. Is Tennessee had the quarterback plan, had that quarterback concession plan following Hendon Hooker worked out, and OU didn't. OU doesn't have their answer post Dylan Gabriel. Tennessee has their answer post Hendon Hooker. It's pretty damn obvious when you watch Nico Iamamaleva. If I mess it up, I apologize. I have it phonetically spelled out. Worked out. He is the one they handpicked, and he's playing like it right now. He plays like he deserves it. Playing really good football down the stretch for Tennessee. So I'll go with OU here for this one, Dan, as my most disappointing team. Although, like you said, there's really been no team that's been more disappointing than Florida State.
I agree.
We have a point. You had a point here. Last, I guess, hot topic. Harold Perkins. And I know Georgia doesn't play LSU this year. But what was it? ACL tear? I forget. What was the injury today? He's out.
It's ACL.
ACL. Dan, you had a point here. I'm gonna let you take it away before we transition into our new segment of sorts.
You don't have to go solo because I don't like that. But Harold Perkins had probably one of the if you think about players in the freshman year, you got Maurice Clarett had an amazing freshman year. I would even put Caleb Downs in the conversation, having an amazing freshman year. But Maurice Clarett, you had Marcus Lattimore. There's a handful of guys that came through college that were absolutely dominant their freshman year. And Harold Perkins was 100% one of those players on that list. There were people who were talking about Harold Perkins would have been the number 1 draft pick in the NFL had he been able to come out after his freshman year. And then his sophomore year, what did he play? Like a handful of games, 2 or 3 games or something like that? Or he was just hurt, right? And then this is, I believe, his third year this year, if I'm not mistaken. Now he's going to miss the whole thing with his ACL tear. And he's just another player in that long list of players where, for whatever reason and whatever the injury may be, just we didn't get to see the best of them. And I hope and pray, not because I'm an LSU fan or anything like that. I'm just a human, and I don't like to see other humans struggle in the way that he is. He was blessed by God with an opportunity to play a sport at a higher level than anybody else. And now he's had 2 injuries while he's been in school that are definitely going to affect his draft status, for one. But I hope and pray that it doesn't affect his long-term success. And I just wanted to briefly touch on it, just to say that just another example of us getting cheated out of seeing a special kid play. And and I always feel that way when a guy gets hurt, like Marcus Lattimore, for example. Probably one of the most dominant running backs I had ever seen in college. And then his career was over. Never was able to play again. And then you got a guy like Zamir White, who comes into Georgia injured off of his very last game in high school, tore his ACL, and then never really was the same guy. He was able to make it to the NFL, but we'll never know what could have been or what it would have been. So, and I'm just hoping that's not the case for a guy like Harold Perkins, because we saw a guy like Todd Gurley, my favorite running back ever, just torn ACL, got the arthritis in there, and just was never the same guy ever again. So, I'm just saying my condolences to Harold Perkins, man. I hope you're able to heal up, and it was a pleasure to see you play when you were healthy, and I hope it doesn't affect your long-term success.
I can't wait to see him at the NFL level, because I'm certain the NFL will use him, will find him a role, more consistent role than what LSU found him. Feels like LSU didn't really know where they wanted to play him, and I think it showed on the tape when he was playing off the edge. One of the best players pound for pound in college football, no doubt. Dan, we have a new segment. We don't really have a Dan rant this week, but I turned to this. This was something you discussed with me last week as something we wanted to touch on, depended upon one result. We got that result. It lines up perfectly, so we're going to do it. I termed this a top dog conversation. Could say a top dog talk, but that's the podcast name. So we did conversation. We did synonym talk. And it's Josh Heupel in Tennessee. Back in 2022, Dan, obviously we remember that year. Tennessee had a great year. Good year. Not great. They didn't make the playoffs. Lost to Georgia. Lost to South Carolina in a game they should have
Well, they lost Hendon Hooker, so
yeah. They lost Hendon Hooker halfway through that thing. But other than that, it was a statement year for Josh Heupel in terms of, hey, I have proof of concept. This is how the offense works. This is what we can do when we have the players, when we have the system running, and all that. And it was great. And then they lost all that. It was 1 year where they had just a great group of players, 3 really talented players on offense, and that led the way for them. Hendon Hooker, Jalen Hyatt, Cedric Tillman, 3 of them, all of them in the NFL now. But Dan, heading into last year, there was something you mentioned. Talk of, can they replace him? How do they replace him? That's been the question, the very question that has seen other programs fail. And some coaches lose their job over it. So before I go any further into this segment, I want to roll the clip that Dan said. We are going to Dan of last year, and I believe it was August. He doesn't look very different. He has a hat. He has a hat on. That's the only difference. But Dan, past Dan, take it away.
And make a lot of progress in the East. Now, listen, I have Tennessee at number 2. It's a lazy pick. I understand that. They lost a lot of talent. And what Tennessee has to be able to do is to prove that they can win with the next set of players. That's what the good programs do, is even though it really hurts to lose great players, good programs can replace them with whatever they have in the pipeline and continue to be successful. That's what we don't know about Tennessee yet. And we don't know if the coaching staff can win with this next group of players. We're going to find out. And we are going to find out. And we are finding out right now that they were able to reload. And that was the question that we had. And that was the question that was going around was, is Josh Heupel a one-hit wonder, or is he a really good coach that can rebuild and reload? And that is the one thing that we are finding out. And I believe, by what team has impressed me the most, that he's been able to do it. And you got to kind of give the man his props, because this landscape of college football is not the easiest landscape to rebuild and re-solidify and reload, because everybody is out here with NIL cash and they're buying people up, and it's harder to keep people in your program. Georgia is clicking at the highest, like one of the highest levels ever. You got Alabama. There are a million people competing for the guys that you would have gotten in the past. So I believe my question has been answered at least one time. They've been able to reproduce what they were able to have in 2022.
Yeah, and I just going back to the conversation we were having in terms of, how this has been the question that has seen people lose their jobs. I mean, the key example is Florida just back in 2020. They had Kyle Trask, they had Kyle Pitts, they had Kadarius Toney. Really great offense over there. Dan Mullen had it humming. It was the best year that Dan Mullen ever had at Florida. And after he lost all that talent, he couldn't make up for it. And granted, I think he was there at Florida the season after for 7 games before he was fired midseason. So maybe not a full example of, hey, I can do it. But still, it goes hand in hand with this conversation of, like Dan says, Josh Heupel so far seems to have reloaded. They have their hand-chosen, hand-picked successor to Hendon Hooker and Nico Iamaleava. I mean, in some ways, I think Nico is the more talented and actually, I think Nico is the more talented quarterback when compared to Hendon Hooker. Even Hooker at his peak, I think Nico is going to be the better quarterback. He already has the accuracy to match it. Go watch him. Go watch him throw. He has a better arm. Go watch him throw. But I guess the one question that we're still waiting to see, and we will find out very soon, is do they have the playmakers to do it? So far, they have. Dante Thornton, Brew McCoy have played great games for them out of the gate. Running back Dylan Sampson has been one of the best has been one of the best running backs in college football. But Dan, the point that I want to make to kind of wrap this thing all up, and I guess we can move on to our Bama preview unless you have something to add, is we have seen evolution in not only the way that Tennessee has playmakers and the way they've reloaded, but we've also seen an evolution in the way they've won a game and the way they win games. In the past, it's been a racetrack. We are faster than you. We can score more than you. We are going to win because our offense is explosive and is built around creating those explosive plays through the air. Now they do that by making defenses get scared of the run game. And once the run game starts hitting and those safeties start creeping out into the box, boom, throw it right over the top of your head, touchdown. Saturday was a little bit different. Styles wins fights, and Tennessee found a new style, a new way to win, and that was with their defense, as Dan alluded to in his hot topic. Tennessee has a good defense, the first good defense they've had under Josh Heupel, and that proved to be the difference. Now, will that be the case when they go play Alabama? Will it be the case when they play Georgia? As Dan said, we're going to find out really soon. So, Dan,
listen, they've got Peyton Manning coming out for a Morgan Wallen concert in full uniform. That's how excited he is. Did you see that?
Yeah, I saw that.
That was hilarious.
Rocky Top is rocking right now. Rocky Top is rocking. Dan, without further ado, let's get in to what everybody's probably tuning in for, and that's the Georgia-Alabama preview. Right now, this is the biggest game of the year. This is the game of the year as of right now. Now, this could change because there's a loaded slate of college football on the schedule. And Dan, I really want to start this. I know I usually just say, hey, we're going to throw it up and we'll just start where we start. Well, this week's a little bit more designed, if you will. I want to start with what some folks, and by some, I mean Josh Pate, would call a padlock stat or padlock stats and how we're going to do this preview. I have 2 stats here in terms of how I think this game's going to come down. Now, I don't give these because I'm saying these are the stats that you can go to, and in a week's time, we'll come back to you and say, hey, you predicted it. It was these stats. This team had these stats, and they won. I really don't give you this. I give you these stats because I just want to show you, despite the fact that this is a complicated game, that this is a tough game, and that there's going to be a lot of hard work going into the game plans from both teams, that this matchup has come down to the very basic, you may call cliche parts of football, which is what I'm about to get to right now, Dan. In each of the last 4 matchups between Georgia and Alabama, the team with the most rushing yards has won this game. And I know you're saying, well, duh, that's usually the indicator of most games. Usually indicates who has control of the line of scrimmage. Yes, accurate statement. But like I said, the point of this is to show just how basic, how fundamental this game comes down to when these two teams match up. The one time the Georgians won this matchup, they outrushed Bama by 110 yards. They had 140 yards to Bama's 30. I didn't remember that. Pretty crazy considering this past week heading into College Game Day, Nick Saban said, yeah, Georgia whooped us in the fourth quarter with their run game. They certainly did. They whooped you over 4 quarters with their run game, it appears. And second padlock sack, and final one before we move on. In each of the last 4 matchups, the winner of this game has also won the turnover battle. I mean, it's fundamental, Dan. It's almost cliche in terms of predictions of how we judge who's going to win this football game. But that's the point. This is complicated. This is going to take a master's degree in terms of knowledge of football for these staffs to come up with these game plans. But at the end of the day, it's going to come down to the same thing we always talk about, and that's winning at the very fundamental level of football, which is going to be the line of scrimmage and the turnover battle.
Yeah, I mean, that's cool, but the year that we lost the SEC championship game before we won in the national championship game, there was an air raid offense. They were just dissecting us through the air. So I don't even care what the Russian numbers said. We lost that game because we couldn't stop the pass. And I understand.
Not even that. Georgia turned it over 3 times.
Well, sure. But I mean, that's obviously part of it. But I hear you. And I understand trend stats. But every game is different. And when I look at this game, I think the one thing that is more important than anything is taking care of the football, turning the ball over and then not turning it over on your end. If you're able to force more turnovers than you give up, I think you're in a much better place to be successful. And then how you want to accumulate your yards is different, because imagine a situation where Georgia has the ball first and they run it down their throat and they're able to do that, right? And so we have some good rushing stats the first drive. Maybe we hold them to a field goal, and then we have another touchdown drive where we put up some. So maybe we're like, I don't know, 150, 160 yards rushing after 2 or 3 drives, right? Then all of a sudden Alabama decides they want to take the top off, and they end up beating the hell out of us through the air. I mean, then what is that good as that 160 yards? I hear you. I understand you. For the most part, you're right. But I don't get bogged down with padlock stats or whatever like that. But I will agree 100% unequivocally, the turnover stats matter more than any of the rushing or the passing stats, in my opinion. But I mean, listen, Georgia many times in Kirby's, and we're going to break the game down, but I'm just going to give my high level thought. And my high level thought is that the one thing that has always stood in Kirby's way is Nick Saban. Well, Nick Saban's gone. Alabama's still there. Alabama's still a really good football team. But if you are a great coach, if you're a legacy coach, your big bad voodoo daddy is gone. And it is time to establish your dominance. Harrison and I actually had a really interesting conversation, and nobody's trying to say that Kirby Smart's the greatest of all time. Nobody's trying to say that. But if we just take Bear Bryant out of the equation and some of those older guys, because they didn't really have the competition level and they could stack their roster with like 400 players because there were no roster limitations, I think it's pretty fair to say Nick Saban is the greatest college football coach of all time. I would think it would be very difficult to argue otherwise. If you look at Nick Saban's college career, he never had anybody that was his bugaboo. He didn't have that hurdle. He didn't have that mountain to climb. There were games that he lost from time to time. Something would jump up and bite him, but he didn't have that one mountain he couldn't move. Well, that mountain for Kirby Smart was Nick Saban. Well, Nick Saban has removed himself. It was 1 for 6, I believe, versus Nick Saban. Yeah, he did get a win over him, and it was a huge one, and we won the national title. And thank you, Lord, hallelujah. But he's gone. So I know this is going to be a tough game. I know this is going to be a physical game. This is not a layup game. But if you are a great coach that runs a great program, you have to go into Tuscaloosa and you have to beat Alabama. There's no longer hoping and praying and wishing. It's time to get the damn job done. Period. It's time to get the damn job done. Harrison.
Drop the mic. Show's over. Bravo. I was saving that part of the conversation for the very end, but we'll leave it at that. We won't double touch on that. Yeah, that was the conversation we had earlier in the week. So, by all means, to answer the question in the title, is this a legacy game for Kirby Smart? Hell yes. And no, he has the national titles. He's probably the greatest Georgia coach of all time, if not if not
He
without
is.
question.
That torch has been put out. That's his.
Okay.
He stomped that damn thing out. Georgia, he's the greatest football coach to ever coach at Georgia. And Irk Russell, may he rest in peace, was never the head coach of Georgia, but he was a hell of a football coach too.
Absolutely. So he is the greatest coach in Georgia's history, and that won't change no matter the output of this game. But as Dan said, the big bad voodoo daddy's gone. I love that quote. Nick Saban's no longer here. It's time for Georgia to stamp itself as the program in college football. And the way to do that, to be the best, you have to beat the best. And there are some. And I don't know if this will always be the case or if this is just, hey, they're Alabama. We are programmed to think they're the best program. Georgia has to win this game. This is their chance to do so. You can't have these games where where this one team always consistently beats you because you're not the best if that's happening. So, by all means, answer the question. This is a legacy game. It's a big game, and it doesn't have big implications in terms of the playoffs because, as Dan talked about today, you can lose one, still get in. You can maybe lose two. You can even lose three. But Georgia, for the legacy's sake, has to win this game. Dan.
And you said, how did we do that? So let's start with the offense, okay? Because we'll touch on the defense in a second, but offensively, have better balance. And balance doesn't mean that you run it 50% of the time and throw it or run and throw exactly the same, okay? Balance is that you're able to throw it when you want to throw it. You're able to run it when you want to run it, okay? And to change it up, keep them off balance. For you to have balance is to keep them off balance. And Georgia, at times, has been fairly predictable. And the other thing is we haven't really been stretching the field. Now, Harris and I have surmised in past shows or theorized or at least questioned, is it possible that Georgia was holding something back? Because they felt like they could have won the other games without showing everything. If that's the case, then Harrison brought up a great point earlier today, and I apologize if I'm stealing your thunder.
You're good.
This is an opportunity for a player like Colby Young, who has been one of my favorite people to talk about since he got here at Georgia. So that's why I'm stealing it from Harrison, because I was going to talk about him anyway. But I wanted to at least say that Harrison brought it up in our conversation. But I think Colby Young has an opportunity to really put his stamp on his presence here at University of Georgia. Not that he hasn't already done that to some extent. I think this is a great, great area for him a game for him to really, really announce his presence. Now, Harrison had an interesting take on Arian Smith. I'll let him do that because I've already stole that, and I wasn't going to talk about Arian. But Harrison is. He's going to tell you something fascinating about Arian. But Dominic Lovett has been a very consistent target. And then we also have a plethora of other guys that have been making plays from here and there, but we need a little bit more consistency. Landon Humphrey is a guy who a lot of people thought was going to come in and instantly replace Ladd McConkey. Now, I think that was a little bit foolish to think that that was exactly going to happen, but we are going to need a couple big catches out of him. Nate Frazier did a really good job early in the season of filling in for Trevor Etienne. However, I think the X factor to this offensive game is Trevor Etienne. I think he's an extremely dynamic player. I did see him pick up a couple plays in blitz pickup. He caught the ball out of the backfield. You can see the explosion. You can see his ability to make people miss. He is going to be able to break some big runs. I'm hoping. I mean, if you want to win this football game, this is what's going to have to happen. Is Etienne's going to have to break a couple big plays, and then you're going to have to lighten the box by hitting plays to the outside, to the middle, over the top. We're going to have to be balanced and dynamic offensively. And the one thing that nobody wants to talk about, Carson Beck, one of his worst games of the year. Well, not one of the absolute worst game of the year was against Alabama last year. Unequivocally, he shit the bed, and he can't do that again. I have faith in him. I've never come on the show and shit on Carson Beck, not ever, not one time, and I'm not doing it now. So please don't attack me. I'm not doing that. I'm just saying his worst game was Alabama. That can't happen again. Is what I'm saying. He is an elite level quarterback. He is what a lot of people think is a possible first-round quarterback, maybe a top 10 pick. If that's the case, go drop your nuts on their forehead.
It's probably the most graphic breakdown that we've had on the show. To continue on with that, I think what you're getting at here, and I agree with you wholeheartedly on Colby Young. I promise this will connect. There's just one stat that really matters to me in terms of showing what's gone wrong offensively for Georgia so far, and it's this. Georgia's third down rate is 39.39%. Believe they were over 50% last year. They were one of the top teams in the country in third down efficiency last year. They were converting on a sub 40% clip. That's 74th in the nation. Not great. Bama's 52.5, which is right around the ballpark where Georgia was last year. I believe Georgia was like a little bit over 55%. Bama ranks 14th. Bama defensively is allowing a 16.3% on third down. That's best. That's best in the nation. Best in class is Alabama defense on third down. So, yes, I'm with Dan here. Georgia needs to find its guy, its go-to. I think that's going to be Colby Young. He has the traits to play the X receiver role that Georgia's desperately missing right now. Georgia doesn't have an X receiver on this, at least from what we've seen so far. Outside of Colby Young, the guy that I think can play the X receiver spot, the guy that's going to handle one-on-one coverage, the guy that you're going to look to in moments and big moments and say, hey, he's going to be our guy. In years past, that person that I'm describing, and it hasn't always been the X receiver, for the last 3 years, it's been Brock Bowers or Ladd McConkey. Georgia has not had its third down weapon, has not had its fallback, has not had its safety net, some people call it. Georgia needs to find it. Right now, as Dan said, I think that person's going to be Colby Young. It has to be. But in terms of the second, I guess, key to this game, and it's something Dan talked about when talking about getting plays downfield, Georgia's going to have to create some explosives. I like your pick of Trevor Etienne because, like I said earlier, Dan, and I know you said it, you didn't always agree with it, but you kind of agreed with it there, that Georgia needs a big game for Trevor Etienne because they got to run the ball. They got to run the ball effectively. All right? Now, I will get to the next point here, which is the explosive plays. Georgia needs something downfield. Absolutely. That's what killed them last year. They had barely any explosive passing plays last year, combined with the fact they couldn't run the ball very well against Alabama. They had, I think, one explosive play to Arian Smith in the third quarter, which gave this guy flashbacks to the big catch he made against Ohio State. Georgia needs more of those, which is why, funny I mentioned Arian Smith. I think Arian Smith goes back to the role and in the offense that we have become conditioned to see him in, and that's how Dan described it, more of a gadget role, more of a guy we're going to put out there, and he's going to run a vert, but he's just so fast you can't even cover him anyways. I think that's what Arian Smith's going to be. I think in terms of putting our theory into practice, in terms of saying this is why we think they've been holding something back potentially, is so far when Georgia's gotten Arian Smith the ball, it's been very side to side, very horizontal. They've gotten him to it. They've gotten him the ball on screens. I think maybe 4 or 5 times it's been screens. Now, the screens haven't hit like they want them to. They have the potential to hit, but they haven't executed those. So I think this week, Georgia's going to hit him in vertically, going to get him involved in the downfield passing game, and they need it to win. This game is could very well come down to an explosive play or two. Who's going to hit it? Who's going to be the guy to make the play downfield? Right now, if I had to give an edge in terms of explosive plays, it probably goes to Alabama because we know where the explosive plays are. Jalen Milroe is an explosive player. Whether he's throwing, whether he's running, he can make the explosive plays. Ryan Williams, explosive player. Georgia needs to find their guy, needs to find it. I'm really curious to see who that becomes, but I'm with you, Dan. I think Colby Young, this has to be the Colby Young breakout game, just as much as in the national championship, it was the A.D. Mitchell breakout game. Do you have anything to add before we get? Yeah.
I did want to counterpoint your take on Trevor Etienne. I said we have to have a big game on Trevor Etienne. That doesn't necessarily mean it's on the ground. He can make plays out of the backfield, and that was kind of what I was leading at, is that he's dynamic. So I wasn't 100% buying into your rushing stat. But yes, Trevor Etienne is a weapon, and we need to be able to deploy him in many different ways. And I think he's a very valuable asset. And I don't believe we had an asset as valuable as him last year. Listen, not disrespecting the running backs that we had. I love Dejon. Dejon Death March was That was a staple in our group chat for 3 years. The Dejan Death March, and Milton has some good games too, but none of them were as dynamic as Trevor Etienne, and I don't think that's disrespectful in any type of way.
And this is the way I think we talked about last year with Dejan. Dejan Edwards is one of my favorite running backs under Kirby Smart. It's not because he had all these explosive plays. It was the simple fact that Dejan Edwards could turn chicken shit into chicken salad. I mean, how many runs would you be like, man, that's a -2, -3? And Dejan Edwards makes it +4, +5. Like, he was just so dynamic in the backfield, found his way to the hole, and always got positive yardage, which, I mean, Trevor Etienne showed a lot of those traits against Kentucky. I mean, Kirby Smart said he had some of the best runs versus Kentucky, and it was because he had to make guys miss that usually you don't have to make miss in the backfield if your offensive line's playing well. I'm with you there. Dan, defensively, I'm going to go ISO here real quick. I know Dan's usually our ISO guy, but I have a little ISO real quick, and I know it felt like
I want to take a nap. I'm good.
You're going to take a nap? All right. Dan, I will go solo screen because I do it because it changed up the viewer's vision. I know you don't like it very much. I don't know. I don't really have a take on it. I kind of like it for both of us. Here's my envision game plan, Dan, because I spent the back half of the bye week watching Bama, watching Georgia. Well, actually, the first half of the bye week was watching that Kentucky game, which was a hard watch. Not even going to lie to you. I think it was a hard watch where you watch it on the TV copy, watch it live, or you watch it all 22 and after the game's over. But here's my vision, Dan, of what the game plan is going to be. In the past, this game has been one where Georgia has to get away from its identity, or how I see their identity defensively. The big bad voodoo daddy was across the sideline, as you say, Nick Saban. And obviously, Georgia gets a lot from Nick Saban. Kirby Smart has learned a lot from Nick Saban. Kirby Smart has tried to emulate Nick Saban in that Alabama program here at Georgia. And Georgia fans, if you want to get on me about saying that, you must not like winning. But that shouldn't be the case anymore, Dan. Nick Saban's not over there. Yes, he has the person. Yes, it's his personnel still. The vast majority of it is players he recruited. But against everybody except Nick Saban since 2020, Kirby Smart has won against. He's beaten a long list of coaches, a lot of good coaches. Ryan Day probably being the best coach, non-Nick Saban, that he's beaten since 2020. There shouldn't be this stigma of, hey, we have to resort to getting, as I describe it, away from our identity. And a key example of that, when I go back and watch last year's SEC championship games, I didn't really see Georgia playing the defense they usually had. They played a lot more three-man fronts with two quarterback spies. I hadn't seen two quarterback spies played by Georgia ever. Never seen it. Really haven't seen it anywhere in college football. It was different. And that whole game plan, at least the way I understand it, Dan, was we are going to keep Jalen Milroe in the pocket and make him beat us with his arm. And he did. He made the plays with his arm that he needed to win the game. So, to me, I think that goes out the window. You can't repeat that. I don't think you can. I don't think you can. I think the way Georgia needs to play this game defensively is the way they play anybody. And that's 4-man fronts, 5-man fronts. You unload the clip in terms of your packages up front. You bring your pressures. You bring your best pass rushers. You let them get upfield. Now, they have to do it disciplinedly. They can't get all the way upfield and give up rushing lanes. Yes, they have to be disciplined. Yes, they have to account for his legs. But if you're fully healthy up front, and I think they will be, or close to it, you have Mykel Williams, you have Warren Brinson, you have Jordan Hall, who can play with Jalen Walker. This is your Stackhouse, Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins. Georgia needs to let Jalen Milroe know that they are coming for him. Don't let him stand in the pocket. Don't give his receivers 10 seconds downfield to get open. I don't think that's an option anymore, not only because it didn't work last year, Dan, but because they have a dude that I think is going to demand respect and attention from Georgia's defense, and that's Ryan Williams. I don't want to give Ryan Williams more than 4 seconds to try and get open downfield. Because, Dan, tell me if I'm wrong. It is hard to cover anybody for more than 3 seconds downfield. It got them killed versus LSU in 2019. You can't do it.
There's a reason. There's a reason that there is a saying that even the greatest guys can't cover for 3 and 4 seconds. Okay, and that's why pass rush is so important, and that plays right into it. You're absolutely right. And then everything you say right. Keep the guy in the pocket, make him throw, operate from in a tight area, and make him operate quickly. You don't want to let him have all day to allow those plays to develop. One, and then obviously a broken play, right? And how many times did we see in that first game of the SEC championship game where we got beat that a lot of those big plays that they hit were broken plays, where you just had elite wide receivers making plays, whatever. So, but the same can be said for Alabama. Don't let Carson Beck extend the play, because when Carson Beck extends the play, he does so with his head up looking to make a play. He's not trying to run. And I think that's kind of an advantage Georgia's way, because in past games, and again, I have not watched every single one of Alabama's games, but it seems like when Jalen Milroe starts to move, more times than not, he does run it. And I would say more times than not, Carson doesn't run it. He's looking to make a play downfield. So I think that the broken play factor plays into our hands, but you're 100% right. Keep him in the pocket. Unload the freaking clip on his ass. And this is another thing. And I'm sorry to hijack your segment.
I just went like 5 minutes or 10 minutes, so you're good. I let out all I needed.
So here's my thing about big games like this. I hate effing losing. Hate it. I am extremely competitive. I don't like losing to my wife playing a board game. I just hate losing. However, I can handle a loss if I knew we did every damn thing we possibly could have done. Like the Falcons losing to the Kansas City Chiefs last night, while I wanted to win that game, I was not angry. Ask anybody, Harrison or anybody else. I was not angry after that game. I did not throw insults. I was not, screw this, screw that. That wasn't me. The Falcons did everything they possibly could do. Maybe had the game taken away from them. Maybe a bad play call, whatever. But they unloaded the clip. So when Georgia plays Alabama, unload the effing clip. Don't hold anything back. If you get beat, you get beat. That's fine. I can live with it. And I think most Georgia fans can. I mean, obviously, nobody wants to lose the football game. But if Georgia's bringing the friggin' house and just beating the hell out of Milroe all game long, and somehow he's able to get one loose and they hit it over the top and we lose the game, whatever, man. I'm fine. But if we get just picked apart all day long because we're staying back and trying not to give up the home run ball, and they just pick us apart and it's slow death, and I know that we didn't just give it our best, I can't handle that. If our offense looks like shit and Bobo goes into stressful Bobo mode where he just starts calling the same plays over and over again, and you know what, you can hit me with the Bobo has the most explosive friggin' offense in the history of the world, and there was a game where Monken didn't do great too. Okay, I don't give a shit. I really don't, because here's the deal: when shit got hard, Monken found solutions. Up to this point, the history of Mike Bobo in the hardest games, he didn't figure out how to get it done. So I better see a Bobo on top of his shit. That's what I want to see, a Bobo on top of his game, where he is in his bag dealing. I don't want to see scared Bobo where he's calling conservative plays. I don't want to see that. And you know what? Again, just like I said on the defense, I think every Georgia fan can live with a Georgia loss if on offense we gave it everything we had. We took a couple deep shots and they didn't work out. Okay. What I can't live with is losing a football game and we don't take any deep shots. I can't live with that. Hell no.
Yeah.
Or running on first down, running on second down, passing on third and long. What else are you going to do on third and long, jackass? Okay, so let's not do that. Okay, so I have held back on Bobo, and I don't think he is the problem. I do think there are games where he has been a problem, not the problem. I want to see good Bobo. I want to see in his bag Bobo. I want to see him. I want to be Todd Monken Bobo. I want to see that. I mean, when was the last time we had a game where we came in here going, oh my God, Bobo had this plan and he just absolutely carved them up? I can't recall one, but I can recall games where we were like, oh my God, Monken was doing crazy stuff and we would just absolutely like blew their doors off. So I want to see that one.
Without getting into this, I guess fully, I don't know if we've. Well, obviously they had their chance.
And that rant was presented by Mango Loco.
There was one game last year that I guess Bobo had the chance to like really get in there and get in his bag and win, and it was Alabama. There's going to be multiple games this year where he's going to need to be in his bag to beat
It's going
these
to be
teams.
required.
Yeah, he has to be. So, like we talked about, legacy games. It's not only a legacy game for Kirby Smart, but it's a damn legacy game for Mike Bobo. Gotta beat Alabama. Gotta get over the hump.
Okay, before we move on from this, let me ask you one question. All right, remove Kirby Smart from the equation, which is almost nearly impossible to do because we know he's involved. But which coordinator do you have more confidence in? Glenn Schumann or Mike Bobo?
I mean,
you know the answer. You just don't want to say it.
It's hard to go against Glenn Schumann, man. There is a reoccurring history at Georgia that defense rarely has a bad game. Even when they give up a shit ton of points, it's usually still solid game plan. And that's the honest answer. Georgia's offense is still developing, still has room to grow. It's not the best offense in college football. It really hasn't been, even in 22 or 21. There's still room to grow. There's still room to be better. And I think that's something everybody needs to recognize. Georgia's defense is usually always top 5, maybe number 1 in the country. I ain't going against that record,
The advice I have for Bobo is what Todd Monken said when we were sitting at the table. So it was me, Cannon, quarterback from Alabama, and Todd Monken. And he said, well, when I left the house this morning, my wife told me, just call the plays that work. Bobo, call the plays that work. There you go.
We turned a defensive segment back into the offensive segment. I realized that. But that's just what happens. That's what you get on the Top podcast.
Dan, it's a flowing conversation, and I'm an offensive guy. I don't know shit about defense. Okay? Run fast, hit hard, don't let them score. The end.
I don't really have an offensive game plan other than what we talked about. Because I
did. I already gave it to you.
Oh yeah, no. And I'm not saying you're wrong or anything. I was just saying I think I have the defensive game plan and Dan handled the offensive here. So I think it's a really well-rounded preview of sorts, if you will. Here, Dan.
I never played defense. I'm not a defensive guy. I don't have a defensive mind. I don't have a defensive mentality. So don't ask me about defense.
He wants points. That's what he wants, and I think everybody wants points. I'm never rooting for a defense.
Why do you think I love Lane Kiffin so much?
Dan, last segment, last part of the show, prediction time. Georgia's 2.5-point favorite, which is mind-boggling considering they're coming off a game where they didn't play well, and
they're on the road.
And they're on the road.
That's really like a 5.5-point lead
in a house of horrors, if I may add. Where are you leaning here? Do you want me to go first in predictions, or do you want to go first?
Yeah, you go first because I want to see where your head's at.
All right, this is tough. Really, really tough. If Georgia was, it's always hard because I think I've been wrong in every prediction I've given in a Georgia-Bama matchup. That's crazy. Well, we didn't even show together in the national championship season.
I've been wrong. I've been wrong 6 out of 7 times.
Yeah, I feel that.
Because I ain't ever picking Alabama to win.
I'm gonna rob my guns here. I'm going to go ISO for this. I'm gonna go ISO for yours. I promise. Dan, this week, and I know he's on the screen, but I promise you he's still listening. I think Georgia wins this, and here's why. We spent the better half of the last 2 years with this in our mind. Coming off a bat, there's nothing like a Georgia team than the one coming off a bad performance. 2 weeks ago, that was that. That was the landmine game. They dodged the landmine. They didn't lose. They didn't get blown up. They're still undefeated. Record's still intact. Well, if it's like years past, Georgia has to win this game. Georgia wins this game. They are big game hunters. That's what we've learned over the last 3 years. They live for games like this. So, yes, there are vulnerabilities, if you want to call it. Yes, Georgia's not this flawless team. I don't think they've been a flawless team over the last 3 years. There's always been nitpicks that you can find, always chinks in the armor. But I think Georgia wins this game because you have to. Not for the playoffs, not for the SEC championship. You can lose this game and still make both. But I think they win this game because I do see the path forward for them. We laid out a game plan and how they can do it. Now, granted, there are lots. The coaches on staff are a lot smarter than both of us, and they probably could draw up a better game plan that doesn't really fit the mold of anything we laid out here. But I think Georgia has the talent. I think Georgia has the defense. That's the one thing we said coming out of the Clemson game. One thing I've said is that Georgia's defense line is just as good, if not better, than what they had in 22, a national championship season. I think that shows on Saturday. I think Glenn Schumann comes out with the unload the clip, get after Jalen Milroe, has a good game plan, and gives the offense every chance to win this ball game. I'm going Georgia, takes this one. I'm going to go 31-24, one-score ball game, instant classic, game of the year candidate. Georgia wins in Tuscaloosa for the first time since Matthew Stafford in 2007. Dan, what say you?
I think most people think that the pressure is on Georgia to win this football game. I will turn the tables on you and tell you the pressure is on Alabama. And let me tell you why. The reason the pressure is on Alabama is they have a new football coach. They have half of the fan base that is locked and loaded, ready to go. You have the other half of the fan base that's in wait and see mode. They're waiting to see what Kalen DeBoer brings to the table. Is he an elite level coach? Now, listen, I believe Kalen DeBoer is a very, very good football coach, and I believe Alabama is going to be just fine. However, this is the first opportunity for Kalen DeBoer to really show what he's made of. So that puts a lot of pressure on Alabama. Now, they really want to win this football game too. Of course, there's pressure on Georgia to win this football game because they're going into a hostile environment, and Bryant-Denny Stadium is going to be rocking. They're going to be playing Dixieland Delight, which is funny because it's a song about Tennessee. But they're going to be doing all that stuff, and they're going to have the lights on. They're going to have all the recruits there. And Georgia, don't forget, this team hasn't given up a touchdown all year long. They will give up a touchdown to Alabama. I'm sorry to break your heart. It's going to happen. And it's funny that Harrison said 31 because that's the number that kept coming up in my head all weekend long. But I'm going to change it up a little bit. I think it's going to be 34-17. Now, my first inclination was to go 31-13. And Georgia gives up one touchdown, 2 field goals. But more than likely, we're going to give up 2 touchdowns. They'll probably kick a field goal, maybe another. I don't know. And I could be 100% wrong. But I really feel like Georgia has the ability to win this football game. They have the weapons. They have everything they need. So I'm going to go with 34, what did I say, 17? Yeah, 34-17 is what I'm going to go with.
Got 2 scores. Both of us have Georgia covering, which 2.5-point line, unless they win by 1 point or 2, they're going to cover. Folks, you heard it here first. Granted, neither of us have a winning record in predicting Georgia versus Bama matchups, so take that at your own risk.
Yeah, I'm definitely 1-6 in those games because probably my worst ever was when I went on Jonathan and Jeremiah's show before we even had a show, and I talked about how the one thing I didn't see was Georgia getting their ass kicked, and they got their ass kicked. So,
if anybody's going to thump Georgia, if anyone's going to beat them and beat them bad, it's this Bama team. Granted, Texas might be able to do it too. We'll see about Ole Miss. Lane, I need to see you play somebody first.
In Tennessee.
Yeah.
We play. We're going on a stretch of 5 weeks where we play 4 teams ranked in the top 10.
This is the season definer. This lays it all out. We'll know what Georgia team we have by the end of this stretch.
Listen, we bitch every year about not having enough games that are worth a crap, dude. We are getting ready to run the gauntlet. If you're scared, get a dog.
There we go. I was waiting for you to say that. I was going to tell you to say it if you didn't say it. Dan, for Dan Kiley, for Harrison Reno, for the Top podcast, for everybody that listens to us every week, the loyal ones, we appreciate you. And if you're new, find us on YouTube, Top Talk, simply enough. Find us on the Twitter, at Dan Kiley 3, at Harrison Reno. We appreciate you for being here. We will see you next Monday night, live, where we are right now, and in podcast form for those listening on podcasts. If you're listening to us on podcasts, I know it's more convenient because you don't like to listen to us, but come look at our beautiful faces. We might be built for radio, might have the voices for it, but we love being on camera. in all honesty. So make sure to subscribe, rate us 5 stars. We do read the reviews when we get reviews. I promise. Make sure to like and subscribe for more Dan Rants. We'll be back here with another edition of the Top podcast. And no matter what happens, Dan, as Kirby Smart said at the end of this press conference, Georgia wins, Georgia loses. We will preview Auburn next week. See you next week, folks.